So you hear people all the time try to make the argument that if God was good, like if God was loving, he wouldn't do this thing or he wouldn't do that thing, or he wouldn't allow this thing to happen, or he wouldn't allow that thing to happen. And the interesting problem with trying to make this argument is that it fails right out of the gate. And I'll show you why. If there is a God that created everything, and let's just do this as a thought exercise, regardless of what you believe, right? Let's just follow the thought through. If there's a God who created everything, that means that this God created thinking, right? Like just process that for a minute. The thing that we do called reasoning, where we sit down and we evaluate the things that he does and make a determination as to whether it's good or bad, he made that, right? Like he gave you the tools through which to reason. And so here's what that means. That means that he also gave you the ability to make decisions in your own mind about what's good or bad or what's right or wrong. And your definition of what's good or bad and right or wrong came from him, because definition comes from him. Like again, when we talk about the idea of there being a creator, that means that he literally had to create every single thing that exists, all the way down to your atoms and molecules, down to your ability to understand the universe, the rules by which you think the universe ought to play, that you're actually trying to use to evaluate the one who made them. When you follow this path logically, here's where you end up. You end up with a false logic. Because if you, as a human being who is clearly finite and comparative to all of the other powers and things that exist in the world, we are so low on the totem pole, it's insane. So if you, as a human being, actually could take a moral position that would allow you to evaluate this God, then that God that you're evaluating is not the one who created everything. And if that God did create everything, then it would mean that he is so far superior to you intellectually, morally, in his way of comprehending things, that it would be irrational for you to think that you could take any type of position of moral superiority from which to evaluate him. It's an astounding irony that people will take this position of intellectual and moral superiority and begin to evaluate God and make all of these proclamations about how, either this God isn't good or he's not very good at his job. Like the level of arrogance that is required to ignore all of the failures in logic and reasoning that would allow you to even think that you could stand in that position are astounding. What does this have to do with God being loving? Well, here's the thing. If we put things in its proper context and we take the position of realizing, okay, if we're going to believe that this creator does exist, then our starting point has to be one of absolute humility and an awareness of how big the deficit is between our understanding and his understanding. And so, what it should create in us is a question of, why does he care at all? Like with the level of power, with the gap, the space between him and us, there's not even an example that I could give in our natural experience that would be comparable. I often use the idea that it would be the equivalent to me sitting in my living room and concerning myself with the affairs of the ants in my backyard. But that's not even an adequate, like that gap isn't even close to how big the gap actually is between God and us. And so this then begs the question, why does he care? And when you start asking that question, that's when you start getting to a very interesting conclusion. Because you look at all the things that exist in the earth, and you look at the way that God set everything up, and then you look at the fact that the narrative that he chose to try and express himself in the earth to humanity was sacrificing his son on a cross, which doesn't seem like a particularly powerful way of demonstrating your awesomeness. In fact, from an outside, from a human mind, it seems insane, and you're left again scratching your head, going, "Well, why? Why would you do all that? Why would you write the story in that way? Like when you're the author who gets to write things however you want." Like we forget sometimes that God isn't reacting to our sin. It's not like God was up there going, "Oh no, the human sinned. I gotta come up with a plan. Jesus, that's how we'll fix it," right? No. That's he wrote the rules that required that Jesus would be the only way to fix the problem. If this was about our sins, snaps his fingers, sin's gone, everything rewritten, nobody remembers anything. Who is going to hold him to account for breaking his own rules? Nobody. And so when you start to look at all of the things that he's done and all of the way that he produced this entire creation, this theater that we're all living in, and then the narrative that he chose to play out in that, which included the sacrifice of his son on a cross, and included the rising him from the dead, and included this process that he's put in place to bring us to a relationship, but a relationship of our choosing, where he's incredibly, let's call it gentle and graceful in the way that he approaches relationship with us. He doesn't force himself on us, even though he's the God of the universe, and he certainly could. He doesn't. He invites us, and he gives us so much latitude to kind of come to our own conclusions. He tolerates our absurd reasoning, that where we come to conclusions that we think we can actually stand in a place of moral superiority and evaluate him. I mean, it's mind-blowing, and it doesn't make any sense except in one singular context: love. And not love because God loves us because he can't help himself. Love because he is love, and he created us in love. That's what it says in, I believe it's Ephesians. He created us in love. The purpose of our creation was to demonstrate his wisdom, and also because he decided prior to our creation that he was going to love us. Now, that is both freeing and terrifying. It's freeing because it means there's nothing I can do to make him love me any more or any less, because he decided prior to my creation that he was going to love me, regardless. His love for me is based on him, not me. He will love me even if I don't love him back, which means that his desire to forgive me will always be greater than my desire to be forgiven. His desire to relate to me will always be greater than my desire to relate to him. He is the first mover in the relationship at every single stage in every single context, all because he chose to love us. Now, I mentioned that it's also terrifying. Here's why it's terrifying. Because of the fact that human beings, when they don't like a person or when they feel like scorned, they a lot of times will just like exit the relationship, right? Like they're just like, okay, whatever, you don't love me, I'm out. God doesn't do that, because his love for us is not predicated on our love for him. God stays in the relationship, even when we're not loving him back. And you see that all throughout history with Israel, where he goes, okay, you're not going to love me back? No problem. Let me turn you over to all of these things so that you can see what having a relationship with other people actually looks like. I'm still going to be here, don't worry. I'm subjecting you to this because I actually want you to have the opportunity to see how much better relationship with me is than all of these other nations that you want to go and whore with. And it's the same thing in our relationship with him. He will turn us over and let us go do all the nonsense that we want to do, just to prove the point that relationship with him is so far superior to relationship with anything else that we could possibly ever seek to satisfy ourselves with in this life. And when you understand it through the lens of love, and you understand it through the lens of he is perfect, that's the other thing you have to bear in mind, is that God is good. A way you could process this is God is the source of good, which means anything that is not of him is evil, which is why it's the knowledge of good and evil, right? So when we think about, okay, if he loved me so much, why can't he let me have what I want and not punish me for it, right? It's because of the fact that in our flesh, we desire things that are actually bad for us. Now, we don't think they're bad for us because they taste good, they feel good, they smell good. We like the experience of it, but we like the experience of it because in the same way that a person who eats a poison berry that tastes good, right? It's like, yeah, he is the only source of good in the universe, then that means that anything that we love that is not connected to him is bad for us. And it's bad in general. It's not just bad for us, it's just bad. I did a teaching a while back called Why Does It Feel So Hard to Trust God? And where I get into way more depth on this topic. You can go check that out if you want to. But I just wanted to make this because so often we improperly contextualize the questions that we have about things that God does. Like we'll read things and we'll go, oh my gosh, how could a loving God do that? You know, like even believers oftentimes refer to the Old Testament as angry God and the New Testament as happy God, which is crazy because all throughout the Old Testament, God is literally begging Israel like, hey, please come reason with me, talk with me. Let's work this thing out. I don't want to do any of this stuff, right? Like so many times. I mean, he literally sounds like a scorned husband, which in some ways he is. But because we so often miscontextualize the things that we're reading, and we read it through a subconscious lens of believing that because we have begun to scratch the surface of what is good and what is right and what is moral, which that surface came from him, we then begin to evaluate the things that he does by the standards that he's teaching us, thinking that somehow we have gained moral superiority to him, which leads us to all manner of unproductive thinking. And so the place we actually need to operate from and orient ourselves from is that there is no reason for God to care about or involve himself in our affairs whatsoever other than love. There's no reason to. There's no intellectual reason to. I know people like to pose, oh, well, maybe God's just experimenting. God already knows how everything's going to work out. He's God. He created everything. He created the rules that the experiment works by. Like we talk about it like he somehow didn't know what was going to happen. If you're able to create reality, then you already know what's going to happen. So any type of like scientific experiment or God trying to see how things are going to play out, all of this stuff is foolishness. The only rational reason that you could come up with why God would create human beings and let all this mess play out the way that it has is that he decided to love us. That's it. There is no other good, rational explanation. And so when we see things that we don't understand, we have to position ourselves in the right place to ask the question and say, okay, I don't understand this. God, show me how this is loving. Show me how this pertains to love. How does this fit? And when you do that, the levels of revelation that come, they will blow your mind. Because as Paul said, his love is unknowable. It's so big, it's so vast, it's so deep, it's so complex. It can incorporate so many things that seem not to fit together. It's somehow able to incorporate genociding entire groups of people while simultaneously loving another group of people. It's somehow able to reconcile people that God knew weren't going to choose him and what the consequences of them not choosing him were going to be, as well as the people that are chosen, while somehow everybody gets to choose, even though God already knows. Somehow his love is able to encapsulate and reconcile all of these things that seem entirely irreconcilable. And it is learning how he reconciles them that helps you to begin to grasp what love actually is, because that's the concept that he is demonstrating with our creation. And let me tell you, it is vast, it is infinite, it is impossible to fully contain. And yet, when you begin to view everything through that lens, and your starting point isn't loving, but rather, what is love? Help me understand what love is, because within love, there's all of these things that seem to be conflicting. But when they reconcile, when he reveals how they reconcile to you, it deepens your understanding of what love actually is, because we have such an immature understanding of love as human beings. It's so incredibly immature. It is the equivalent of my 3-year-old telling me I'm a bad dad because I won't let her eat all of the candy. It's foolishness. Because she's 3. She doesn't have any concept of how the world works. She doesn't know anything, right? God, universe, everything that he's created, we know nothing. We are less than a 3-year-old. We are an atom. We're not even born yet. That's how little we know. And I'll leave you with this. One of the most important things that Jesus accomplished wasn't dealing with sin. The most important thing he accomplished was demonstrating unequivocally that God's intentions towards us are good so that we can trust him. Because of the fact that without being able to trust him, it would be impossible for us to mature to the place of actually understanding love. Because the first time we ran into a conflict, like how can God be loving and then also allow all of the evil that exists in the world? Like this is a quandary, it's a conundrum. And it's one of those things that you cannot get to rationally. You will always come to the wrong conclusion rationally. You can only get there by reconciling it within love. But to get there, you have to be able to trust the person who owns the definition of love. And if you cannot trust him, then you will never be able to learn what love is, and you will never be able to reconcile those things, and you will come to incorrect conclusions about God and whether he is actually good and whether he loves us and who he is. And so we have to begin with Jesus. We have to look at Jesus on the cross and go, okay, God made a move here that doesn't make any sense. There was no reason for him to do that. He needed nothing from us. And yet he created an entire theater and an entire narrative that would allow him to demonstrate his love to us through the most gruesome and brutal sacrifice imaginable. There is something going on here that demands my attention, that I must say, okay, I'm struggling to reconcile all the evil in the world and you being a good God, but I cannot ignore the fact that you sacrificed your son on a cross for me and created a reality where that would even be necessary when there was absolutely no reason whatsoever to do it. And it leads me to this very strange place of going, somehow this only makes sense in love, and yet it does not seem loving. I must be missing something. And when you get to that place, that's the place. That's the place where you rest your trust on the cross and you say, okay, Lord, you moved first. Jesus existed. That's historically demonstrable. We know that he died on a cross. We know what he said about himself. And if I trust that he was who he said he was, then that means that I can trust you that my understanding of love is immature and incomplete. And even though these things don't seem to reconcile, I can trust that somehow in love that they do. And now I need to ask the question rightly, not from a place of arrogance and judgment, but from a place of absolute humility and recognition that your ways are so much higher than my ways that you have to raise me up to your ways. And when you do that, you will begin to understand the love of God. And the more you understand about the love of God, the more perfected you become in your trust. And in perfect love, there is no fear. You want to live a life that's completely fearless? You want to live a life where you have a peace that surpasses all understanding? Ask the hard questions, but ask them the right way. Ask him in the right context. Let him begin to show you what love actually is, what it actually means, how vast and expansive and mind-blowing it actually is. Walk down that path, and I assure you, you will find things that you never thought possible.